All right, now that we've talked about how psychological experiments and research can be biased, we need to talk about all of the specific steps and ways that we try to keep it not biased, and also all of the methods that we use, because depending on what your question is going to depend on what type of method you use. So the first thing we need to start off with is operational definitions. And operational definitions are basically a statement about the procedures used to define research variables. So basically, you are explaining what you mean in your hypothesis. You are defining exactly what you are measuring. You have to be clear, and so that others can replicate. Because if you remember back in the day in biology class, you talked about the scientific method, and we really talked about that other people have to replicate your experiment. So you must be clear on what exactly you are doing. So if your hypothesis is chocolate causes violent behavior, okay, then what do you mean by chocolate? Is it dark chocolate? Is it white chocolate? Is it milk chocolate? What percentage of dark chocolate? Is it 75 cacao or 60 cacao? What do you mean by violent behavior? Is it just, is it someone who pushes or shoves or punches or shoots somebody with a gun? What exactly is violent behavior? Okay, so you could create a checklist for the behavior. For the chocolate, you would want to define the amount and the type of chocolate that you are using. Now, one of the methods that we can use in psychology is descriptive methods. So this is a starting point of any science's description. All right. So we need to establish some techniques to describe behavior. We are not trying to determine cause and effect. We are literally just describing somebody's behavior. Okay. So 4 techniques. Number 1, case studies. Number 2, naturalistic observation. Number 3, laboratory observation. Number 4, surveys. These are our descriptive methods. So let's start with case studies. Case study is a detailed picture of one or a few subjects. And we'll look at a lot of case studies where someone has studied a very small group, 10 or less individuals, or a very small population, like some indigenous population that hasn't seen people haven't seen outsiders for hundreds of thousands of years, or it's one particular case. This is one of the oldest research methods. For one, you can get a lot of detail. So if you spend a lot of time talking about one person, you really can dive in there. And if you're only talking about one person, you're not really going to run an experiment. And so, if you're trying to, figure out something about different types of children and you were looking for a feral child, you're probably not going to go out and find one. You're going to have to, look for a case study. So the disadvantages here are that you can't apply a case study because it is so narrow with the subjects, the number of subjects. You cannot necessarily apply that to everyone. Okay. So I don't know if you remember the show John and Kate Plus 8. They're since divorced, but they had 8 children, a set of twins, and then 6 sextuplets, I guess, after that. And it was just a show about their life. And that's a case study. That is one family's experience with all these 8 kids. But does that family look like your family or my family? Can we apply the same principles from their family, what they did with their family, to ours? No, because I only have 4 children, and so I certainly don't have to have a routine to put socks on 8 kids every morning. All right, naturalistic observation. This is when you watch subjects in their natural environment. Okay, so we had Jane Goodall, and she went out and watched chimpanzees. You don't manipulate the environment. You are just an observer. You're just an observer. Okay, we are not explaining behavior. We are saying things like, and the male gorilla climbs up a tree. The male gorilla peels a banana with only his index finger and his thumb. The man, like, it is all just facts, observations of what is happening in the moment in front of you. Now, there are advantages, obviously. You get a realistic picture of behavior. What does that real behavior look like? Okay. Now, there is a bias called the Hawthorne effect, which is also known as the observer effect, where the subjects can modify their behavior in response to the fact if they know they're being studied, which in human naturalistic observations, you have to tell people they're being studied. So they may actually change their behavior once you tell them when you're being studied. And animals also might change their behavior if they notice people are watching them. Okay. Now, observer bias is the tendency of observers to see what they expect to see and ignore things that don't fit. So if you are really observing in a naturalistic way, you are describing everything without judgment, without pretense, none of that. Okay? Each naturalistic setting is unique and might not hold true for other situations at other times. So we might not be able to apply these principles across the board again because we're only watching this particular group of apes at this particular time in this particular place. All right, laboratory observation. Laboratory observation is observing behavior in animals and people. It's just not practical sometimes in a natural setting. So if you want to observe the reactions of infants to a mirror image of themselves and record them with a camera, you can't really do that in a natural environment, right? So you got to set that up in a lab so that you can see what that looks like. The kind of equipment might be difficult to set up in a natural setting. However, a laboratory setting can have the disadvantages of creating an artificial situation that doesn't result in real behavior. It results in an artificial behavior because this setting is a laboratory setting and is an artificial setting. And the last one we're going to talk about is the survey method. So the survey method is the most common type of study, and it looks at many cases in depth. It's cheap, it's fast, and researchers do surveys when they want to estimate from a sample of people the attitudes and behaviors of the whole population. So we know these in political polls. So they'll poll 10,000 people and then they'll extrapolate, say, the percentage of people that are going to vote for this wolf over here. And they'll say, well, out of 10,000, 6,000 are going to vote for the wolf. So then they'll take that out to the whole population and say the wolf is probably going to win because he'll have 60% of the vote. Researchers can get a lot of information from a lot of people quickly, but you have to be careful about the group that you survey. You can get different results depending on how the questions are worded or who asked the questions as well. So as far as the group of people, if I take 10,000 people and they're all white men, they're going to give me a different response than if I take 10,000 people of all different sexes, of all different ethnicities. So you have to be careful about the group of people you're surveying. Okay? You need to make sure that it is reflective of the population as a whole. So if my population that I want to know about is the group of students at Moz, I wouldn't go surveying any of the teachers, or I wouldn't survey students from other schools. I would only survey students from Moz. So you have to make sure that your group of people you survey is reflective of what you're trying to study. And as we're going to see, wording matters. So when Michigan residents were asked, does Michigan spend too much, too little, or the right amount on prisons and corrections? They 38.4% said spend too much, 35.4 said not enough. However, when they were asked whether spending 1.3 billion, the actual amount, on prisons and corrections was too much, too little, or the right amount, basically 55% said too much, 14% said not enough. So you can see the difference in just how they worded the question made a big difference. Then they divided that down per prisoner. That was $23,700 per prisoner. And 73.5% said that was too much, and 6% said that was not enough. So you have to be incredibly specific about what you are asking in your words. Okay? All right, gender and race matter. Do you agree with the following statement? The problem faced by blacks were brought on by blacks themselves. When interviewed by whites, 62% of white respondents agreed, which is sad. It makes me very sad for them. They're ignorant. But when interviewed by someone who was black, 36% of whites agreed because a black person was asking the question. Do you agree with the following statement? Abortion is a private matter that should be left the woman to decide without government interference. When interviewed by a man, 64% of the women agreed. When interviewed by another woman, 84% of the women agreed. So who is asking the question matters. So the face that is handing out the papers and asking the question matters. Now, anytime you're doing an experiment, you need to identify the population you want to study and make sure that your sample represents the population you want to study. How do you obtain a representative sample of students at your school? You choose a random sampling. So there's 400 students at Moss. I would not send 400 surveys out. That would be too much. But I would just draw kids. I would draw, let's say 25 kids out of a hat who were freshmen, 25 sophomores, 25 juniors, 25 seniors. So I have a equal division of class and ages, but then I have a completely random drawn out of a hat sample of students. Large representative samples are better than smaller ones. So now it also depends on the population. So I would think surveying 100 kids at Moz for 400 would be fine. But if I had a student population of 2,000, I would need probably 500 people to make that a valid sample. And the last thing about surveys is that ordering of questions matter. Ask whether the country has healthcare problems or a healthcare crisis. 55% of U.S. citizens say crisis. Ask them if the country has a healthcare crisis or healthcare problems. 61% say problems. Would you say that traffic contributes more or less to air pollution than industry? 45% say traffic contributes more. 32% says industry. But if you flip that, then you say 24% say traffic and 57% industry. So how people tend to agree more with what they heard at the end, right?